Hello everyone and welcome back to Motorcast, and today I am here with Josh and we are going to be previewing the new GP3 season starting off in Spain this weekend at Catalunya and running through until Abu Dhabi in November when the season comes to a climax, and it promises to be a very unpredictable and exciting season with a lot of new names, a lot of the bigger names from last season moving on, and also a lot of new regulations, particularly the new DRS regulation, which I'm sure we'll get onto at some point later. So, as I said, with a lot of the established names kind of moving on from last season, whether that's to F2 or to kind of other categories as they pursue different things, what do you expect from this season then, Josh? We in for kind of an exciting year?
Yeah, definitely. Should be a pretty interesting year, I think, for GP3. I think the main story this year is going to basically be who can stop ART from dominating, because they have an almighty four-car lineup: Jack Aitken, Narei Fukuzumi, George Russell and Anton Hubert as well. So some very, very talented names there. Three of those affiliated with Formula 1 teams, and just the might of ART over the past few years has been absolutely mega. And I think it's going to take something really, really special to beat them in both the teams and the drivers' standings. But I think there are quite a few names, to be honest, looking down, that could spring a surprise. And really, I think there could be quite a few names that I think most people have probably never heard of. But I think by the end of the year, quite a few of these will be firmly engraved in people's minds because they'd have put on, I think, a really, really good show this year.
Yeah, as you were saying, ART, the strong favourites once again this year, are reigning champions, obviously last year's champions both in the drivers with Charles Leclerc and in the constructors as well. And it is also where we see all our British hopes pinned on this year. So we've got Jack Aitken, who finished 5th in the championship last year, and with a lot of the other British drivers moving on, it's kind of down to him really to pick up the gauntlet and carry the British Challenge forward for the championship this season, and that has definitely got to be his goal if he wants to be progressing on to better things, so maybe F2 and maybe into F1. And then we've got our second and only other British driver on the grid, George Russell, moving into ART as well, with Fukuzumi, also finished 7th in the championship last year, also is going to be looking to go progress on this year and maybe mount a challenge for the championship. And as you were saying, Antoine Hubert, the 4th and final driver for ART, and I'm sure they're all going to be pushing for a championship challenge. So what can we expect from ART this season? I'm sure they've got very, very high expectations, but who do you reckon is going to be the standout driver in there?
I think going into this season, it's got to be Aitken, of course, coming off the back of a solid debut year. I think, of course, moving across as well from Arden. He hasn't, of course, got the experience with ART like Fukuzumi has, but I think Aitken really does have the real potential to go on and win this championship. Great racecraft. I think qualifying is probably the area he's going to be focusing on most. But I think if he can nail that, then he could really kind of cement an early lead in the championship, which would be pretty unassailable. He did struggle early on last year in the opening round, so I think he's going to want to be putting that right, getting his qualifying sorted, and I think he could really put on quite a serious championship threat, and possibly, some people may be considering he might dominate the championship, but for me, because there's another Brit alongside him in the name of George Russell, I think there's going to be quite the challenge there, because Russell is extremely talented. Of course, came from the kind of British ranks and then, of course, moved to the European Formula 3. It didn't quite go his way, because, of course, he won the Formula 4 Championship, back in 2014. He kind of moved into 2015 as kind of one of the championship favourites. But unfortunately it didn't quite work out for him in his first year, and then his second year he was so quick, but just quite a few reliability issues for him, but still managed to finish the year in 3rd place. So I think Russell's definitely going to be one to watch, and for me it is Russell versus Aitken really for the title, and certainly from ART, those are the two drivers I'm going to be watching most. For Fukuzumi, I think this is probably his last chance. I think he had a difficult 2016. I think he showed a fair bit of promise and a fair bit of consistency at times, but mainly it was just kind of a lack of overall pace and some silly incidents as well. So I think he's got a bit of a point to prove, and Hubert is kind of the guy, the kind of 4th man who really could spring a surprise, because I don't think there's too much pressure on him, but he's immensely talented. He did a great job in Formula 3, quite under the radar, but now I think he's got a pretty good platform, of course, with ART. As with all the drivers, like you mentioned, I think all of them really have to be challenging for that championship.
Yeah, it has to be said, Aitken versus Russell is going to be a very, very interesting one from the British point of view. And despite Jake Dennis, Jake Hughes and Matt Parry all moving on from GP3 after last year, we've got a lot of excitement on our hands with two drivers both going for the title from Great Britain. Moving on now to Arden, and we've got here Nico Caro, who was 10th in F3 last year and also has his Red Bull links. It seems to be a very, very popular category this for the Red Bull drivers, if not many other teams. We've then got Leonardo Pulcini, who is our champion from the Euro Formula Open, so he's obviously got a lot of pedigree as well. We've then got Stijn Schulthurst, who upgraded from the Campos team, so he'll be looking for a lot better this year, of course. So it seems like they've got quite a good mix in this team. Three drivers who have had very, very different experiences so far and very, very different 2016s, it has to be said. So they'll be fighting. It'll be interesting to see which of these three drivers really can come out on top, considering their different experiences. So which front do you think they'll be fighting on out of these three then, really, in 2017?
It's going to be an interesting one for sure, like you mentioned. I mean, Arden were probably the quickest car really at the end of last year. They really were a consistent threat to ART. They had a difficult start to the year, so hopefully they can put that right and really hit the ground running. But it's going to be difficult, to be honest, with those three drivers. All immensely talented, but not quite with the experience levels required to really, I think, take the fight to ART from the very start, but I think by the end they could be right with them. Pulcini is probably, I think, the pick of the bunch, to be honest, for me, from those three. Although Nico Caro does have Red Bull backing, he hasn't impressed me that much over the past few years. He's done a fairly solid job, and I think there is potential to grow for sure. And we've seen previously that you don't need to have massive amounts of success before you move into GP3. Some drivers just come into GP3 and then they really, really do start to form. But for me, Pulcini, I think, is probably the best of those three. Stockhurst, had a decent, I think, debut year, definitely got better as he went on, but I can't see him challenging for the championship. Pulcini was quick in testing, so I think it'd be him that's leading Arden's charge, but I'm sure Caro won't be too far behind.
Yeah, Arden's sort of the team that have really been the main challengers to ART in recent times. They'll be looking to do the same again this year and mount the challenge for the championship. If not the favourites, they'll still be looking to push for those race wins and three drivers with something to prove, so that'll be a very, very interesting one to see indeed. Moving on now to Trident, and we've got another interesting driver lineup here with Kevin Jorg moving from the Dams team. Giuliano Alesi with a lot to prove this season. He's been given another chance after a poor first season in GP3, it has to be said. And then Ryan Tvita as well, the American F3 graduate, who is probably at the moment most famous for his the huge crash he was involved in last season, but he'll be looking to change that, of course. And then finally, another rookie, Dorian Boccacelli from France, graduating from the Formula Renault 2.0 series, where he was the runner-up. He was very, very quick in testing, so he could be potentially one to watch, maybe a dark horse for the Trident team. That'll be very interesting to see. Our second four-man driver lineup here. So what do we expect to see from Trident this year?
Yeah, it should be a strong challenge, I think, from Trident. Boccolacci will definitely be leading their lineup. I think he should have the full team behind him, to be honest. I think, like you said, he was incredibly quick in testing, kind of a late deal with Trident, but I think, he's got the potential to really be a bit of a Luca Giotto, whereby most people probably haven't heard of him before now, but, I think by the end of the year, he could be, quite up there in terms of names for the future of possibly even Formula 1. Probably one of, France's best young talents. Of course, went into kind of Formula 3 at quite a young age, didn't quite perform, took kind of a backward step, like you mentioned, to Renault 2.0, and was run up to only Lando Norris, so that's no mean feat, really. It's not a bad person to lose out to, for sure, so I think Boccolacci could definitely be challenging for the title this year, and should get multiple wins. Kevin Jorg, I'm not quite sure on him, to be honest. I think consistent points finishes is probably the best he can hope for. He didn't show too much at Dams last year, and it was dropped by the Renault Driver Academy as well, I believe. Giuliano Alesi was actually retained by Ferrari after he said what was a pretty woeful 2016. Was really out of his depth, to be honest. I did feel sorry for him because he was 16 and in GP3, and I think it really did show his lack of experience. So hopefully he can have a better 2017, but to be honest, I can't see him having any more affiliation with Ferrari after this year. I think, unfortunately, that's going to be just too much pressure for him, but hopefully he can still get a few points finishes, although I think podium or wins is probably slightly out of his reach, with all due respect. Ryan Vetter, probably in the same camp of Jorgen Alesi. So really, Boccolacci is really the only person from Trident I see getting regular podiums and wins. So although they do have a 4-car lineup, it's probably not the strongest lineup in compared to previous years. But you never know, there could be quite a few surprises in there. Maybe I'm being a little harsh, but I think Boccolacci really is the only man there that I think could provide a threat to ART.
Yeah, Boccolacci, as I should have said, not Boccicelli the first time, but he does seem to be the standout driver from this team. Trident, again going with the 4-man lineup, but Boccolacci does seem to be the standout name in this one. Like you said, only runner-up to Lando Norris, which is quite a good achievement from the Formula Renault 2.0 series, so he does look very, very quick. Not just from previous experience, but also testing, he was very, very strong, as I mentioned. But moving away from Boccicelli slightly, we do seem to have kind of a trend in GP3 in recent years where drivers tend to spend 1 to 2 years before kind of moving up or moving on, possibly to other categories. A few have higher hopes, as we'll get onto at a later point, of F1 or F2 maybe now, but a lot kind of feel that they've reached their maximum, so maybe we could be looking at Jorg or Alesi here, and obviously we saw with a lot of the British drivers, as we mentioned earlier, have now moved, kind of taken a sideways or even a backward step this year. So we've got a lot of these sorts of drivers who will maybe be making a bit of a sideways step this year. So if you're one of those drivers in that sort of position where you're not really going to make a step up, how would you kind of prepare for this season? What would be your aims, and how would you look towards the future?
I think, for some people, they can get distracted, I think, by the bigger pictures. Some drivers kind of are so focused on Formula 1 and impressing the Formula 1 teams that they kind of lose focus and have just so much pressure on them. They find it difficult to perform, and they really get bogged down by just one bad weekend. So I think really for these drivers, they've just got to do the best job they can each weekend and really just, put on a good show. And whether or not they do attract the attention of any Formula 2 or even Formula 1 teams, then, so be it. But if they don't, then, then they can go and look for kind of other series, Blancpain GT, the World Endurance Championship. There is plenty of opportunities out there, and it's arguably a lot better to kind of throw in the single-seater towel, when you're 19, 20, and really start to forge a career early on in sports cars. We kind of spend ages, kind of wasting your time around the kind of GP3 Formula 2 ranks and never to get into Formula 1, but to have spent millions and millions of pounds in the process, and of course, most importantly, years of your career, probably while you're at your best, trying to get to Formula 1 only to fail, when you could have had plenty of success in Blancpain or the World Endurance Championship, which I think those series have kind of shown, but you can just kind of come in and do a really, really good job. There is a real place for young drivers there where they can have success, pretty much from the debut season. So yeah, an interesting one, like you said. We've had quite a few drivers leaving over the past few years, but have gone on to have some pretty decent success. Or you can do what Alex Palau did and go to Japanese Formula 3, doing the Adrian Sutil route, and go and try and win the championship there, of course, like Sutil did in 2006, and that got him into Formula 1 the following year. So, maybe that's an alternative route to consider, but, he's probably forging a career in Japan now, possibly kind of Super Formula, Super GT. So really the possibilities are endless, and maybe it seems a bit boring now just to go from GP3 to Formula 2. Now there's so many different options to consider.
Yeah, I think it is kind of the point in your career, this GP3, where you have to make these really, really important decisions as a young driver. Do you be realistic and kind of take a bit of a sideways step, maybe into the World Endurance Championship, or do you still pursue the dream of making it into F2 or F1 possibly? And that is a really important decision, because it could potentially decide if you spend the kind of the prime of your racing career really in sort of the best place. But anyway, moving on now to our fourth team, which is Dams, and they have got Santino Ferrucci, the American, and Tatiana Calderon in their team this year, the only female driver on the grid. They'll be both looking to kind of move up the grid. Ferrucci had quite a solid season last year. Calderon not doing quite so well, only scoring 2 points, and obviously looking for a lot better this year. And then their third driver is their only rookie, Bruno Baptista, again moving up from the Formula Renault 2.0 series. So I guess we've got, again, 3 different situations really here. Ferrucci kind of looking to build on a solid season, might be looking potentially to impress some of the F2 teams. Calderon really has to, I guess, manage her expectations, perhaps look elsewhere, after this season, just put in a solid season, try and impress some other teams elsewhere. And Bruno Baptista, obviously as a rookie, possibilities are open for him, and he'll be looking to have a solid first season as the only Brazilian driver on the grid this year. So what do you think we'll see from the Dams team this year then?
I think Ferrucci, of course, he's an Haas F1 development driver. Calderon's a Sauber development driver. But as you mentioned, both were kind of different fortunes last year. Ferrucci, I think, has a solid base to kind of go from. I think he's got a lot of potential. Really, this year he could win multiple races, or he could possibly fail to win a race. It's pretty hard to predict, I think, with Ferrucci. But I really do wish him the best of luck. Quite the American talent, but it's probably one of the greatest American talents, I'd probably say, at the moment. 18 years of age, and of course a bit of a Haas protege as well. So if he can have a breakout year this year, then we could see him kind of get a few practice outings at the very least in that Haas, which would be very good to see. Yeah, like you said with Calderon, I mean, this is a real make or break year. She's had quite a few chances. I really do have a soft spot for her, and I really desperately wanted to do well. Completely being biased there, but I do hope she does do well this year, because like you mentioned, not the best year last year with Arden, but now she's moved to a new team, Dams. She seems pretty comfortable there, so hopefully she can have a much improved year. Baptista, interesting one, not the best junior single-seater record coming into GP3, so expectations will be quite low for him, but then again, you have low expectations, it's fairly easy to exceed them, so he could be a bit of a surprise. We'll have to see. Hopefully we'll see him stick around for the full year as well. Not quite sure the funding situation for him, but hopefully he can last out for the year and get some good development. So I think in terms of, I don't think we'll see a title challenge, I think, from any of those three, but I think certainly wins, I think, could be possible for Ferrucci. Regular points hopefully for Calderon, and hopefully Baptista can get a few points as well.
Yeah, I think Ferrucci does have to be the standout name from that team. Obviously, still got age on his side, as well as the Formula 1 link, and it will take great hope and courage from what Charles Leclerc has managed to achieve so far with the Haas link. And I think this has got to really be his breakout year if he wants to be moving up. Obviously, like you said, could be on some F1 testing, so it will be a very, very exciting year in prospect for him. Moving on to Jenzer now, the only team with only 2 drivers confirmed, and it may possibly stay like that, obviously with 1 seat still open, but we don't know yet if that's going to be confirmed. Arden Beni had a very, very solid first season, managed to finish 10th in the championship despite not managing to do the first 4 rounds, and very much known for his reverse grid poles, and obviously Karen Chandok, great admirer of him, which is always going to be helpful. And his teammate is Alessio Lorandi, who who stays with the team actually after only 4 races and no points so far. So he'll obviously have a little bit of experience, and he'll have a solid base, if not any points, to build on from last year. So I think Beni has to be kind of the standout name of that pair. He'll be looking to move up the grid this year after a very, very solid start, it has to be said. So what do you think we can see from them this year, particularly Arden Beni?
Yeah, I think it's a shame, to be honest, that Beni wasn't picked up by one of the bigger teams, because I thought he did a really, really solid job, and I'd love to see him, somewhere like Trident or Arden, but unfortunately, I say unfortunately, with all due respect to Jenzer, of course, they don't quite have the kind of, budget of someone like ART, but still, I think Beni could have a really, really good year, kind of being the underdog, probably doing a similar thing to what he did last year, just kind of carrying on that kind of curve of, like you said, just getting the reverse poles. But yeah, I think a lot stronger feature races, of course, will be needed from him this year to prove he's not just kind of using that gimmick to get good results. But yeah, like I said, 10th in the championship the last year, despite missing the first 2 rounds in first 4 races. So I think he could be in for a pretty good year. And Lorandi, Po Grand Prix winner, he's no slouch either. So I think Jenzer have a pretty good 2-car lineup here with Lorandi and Beni. So I think both of them are really ones to watch, and both could, I think, spring a surprise at some of their kind of more favoured tracks.
Yeah, Arden Beni, like you said, a little bit unfortunate not to be higher up the grid, and Alessio Lorandi, obviously we are yet to see the best of him, I think it's safe to say. Moving on now to our final team, which is Campos, and they are going for 3 rookies this year, all from 3 different categories. The first of which is Marcos Silva, the Argentinian, coming from the Italian F4 series, which he in fact won. Then we've got Raul Hyman, who's had a bit of an interesting path. It did look like he might be going into F2, but with his experience from F3, I'm sure he will be fine in that seat. And also, finally, Julien Falchero, the Frenchman, from the Formula Renault 2.0 series, does seem to be quite a popular one. So Campos, as you might expect, gone for 3 rookies this season, and these 3 guys probably all looking to kind of consolidate their places and form a good base, really, to maybe move up the grid next season.
Yeah, interesting one for Campos. So they've gone with 3 rookies, as you mentioned. Quite an interesting choice, I'd say, compared to some of the rivals. But, I think they've got 3 decent rookies there. Seber is definitely a big talent. I'm hoping he's going to have a solid year this year, because he beat Mick Schumacher to what was a thrilling Italian F4 season. So hopefully he can continue the good work into GP3 and be kind of what's the thing? Argentina's the next big hope. That's what I'm trying to say. And Julien Falchero, I think is a kind of like another one, as you mentioned, from 2.0, possibly kind of having a bit of a battle with possibly Batista, of course. Both of them raced in kind of the same series last year, so maybe they'll kind of continue a bit of their rivalry, kind of fighting for those kind of lower points paying positions. And of course that 8th place is reverse pole for race 2, so you never know what's going to happen. If they can kind of get into the 8th place, they can get a really good shock result in the sprint race. So that's probably going to be his target. And same with Ralf Hyman as well. As we mentioned, nearly got the F2 seat, but he's had to settle for the F3 seat, the GP3 seat rather, coming from F3. So I think overall should be an interesting season for Campos. Seber should be leading their charge, and I think Hyman and Falchero will be pretty evenly matched.
Yeah, Seber does seem to be the kind of the headline name, as you'd naturally expect, after beating someone like Mick Schumacher to that title last year, and he has proved to be a very, very big talent. Now, moving on to a few more general points, we touched on this earlier about some drivers maybe realising they won't be able to progress into a kind of F2 or F1, maybe due to age, due to money, maybe not having the connections they need, or perhaps just simply they've been in GP3 for quite a long time now and they're looking to impress elsewhere. But last year we did see 5 drivers graduate from GP3 into F2: Charles Leclerc, Alexander Albon, Antonio Fuoco, Nick De Vries and Ralph Boschung. So is there anyone that you'd say kind of stands out this year from the current grid as someone who might be able to take it to the next level in the coming years?
Yeah, in terms of Formula 1, I'd say Aitken and Russell are probably your 2 best bets. Kari, of course, does have that Red Bull link, so he could possibly up there. Ferrucci and Calderon both have links with Formula 1 teams, so expect them to at least get some form of testing outing, hopefully, over the next year. But yeah, Aitken and Russell, I'd say will be in Formula 1 within the next 5 years. As for the rest, it's a bit of a free-for-all, to be honest. I mean, in terms of Formula 2 progression, I expect Boccolacci hopefully will get... I say he could go a similar route, to be honest, to Luca Giotto, whereby he gets a promotion to Trident's GP2 team. That's a solid prediction I'm going to make right now. In terms of the rest of them, it's tough. I mean, it is so hard to predict which ones are going to kind of go into Formula 2. Fukuzimi will probably replace Matsushita possibly at ART next year in their Formula 2 programme. So that's maybe one to watch. Hubert as well could be up there. Kari, possibly Pulcini. There's literally, I think there's not many drivers really on the grid that wouldn't have a chance, I think, of getting into Formula 2 next year. But I'll make my prediction as saying Aitken and Russell to get into Formula 1, and let's say those all 4 ART drivers, Pulcini and Boccolacci and Ferrucci and Sipper to get into Formula 2, I reckon. And Beni.
Yeah,
this is the same.
Beni as well.
I can't predict. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's going to be quite a lot. I think it's safe to say.
That's the consensus.
Yeah, if not all straight away, I think we will see quite a few. And obviously, as we've already touched on, quite a few British hopefuls, young British hopefuls looking to maybe progress through the natural route, which does tend to be the case with kind of quite a lot of our young British drivers. Aitken and Russell maybe looking to kind of make the next step and follow in the footsteps of Jolyon Palmer, maybe if that doesn't sound even if that doesn't sound quite so glamorous a career, it's still F1 nonetheless. But and yeah, like you said, we're going to have a lot of these current drivers moving on into F2, so we'll see a lot more of them in the future. Now, this is something that we touched on in the F2 preview, kind of the future of the series of GP3 as a whole. So since its formation in 2010, GP3, despite it being a feeder series, hasn't really been kind of a natural path into F1, or to an extent even F2 in recent years, more and more due to money and kind of young drivers just being snapped up so early, again as we touched on in our last preview. So we've had 9 F1 graduates so far from GP3, 4 of them being GP3 champions in Bottas, Kvyat, Gutierrez and Esteban Ocon. And obviously Bottas recently becoming the first GP3 graduate to actually win a Formula 1 race. So it does seem to be quite a popular series. As I said earlier, with Red Bull, obviously Sainz, Kvyat, Jean-Eric Vergne also coming through from GP3 into F1. But seeing as it's kind of a main feeder series really for F1, do you think it kind of lacks big names? And what do you make of the future of GP3 as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's in a strange place really. Now Formula 2 has come in, and of course GP2's name has changed, and that's about it. But it does seem a bit out of place to have Formula 1, Formula 2 and GP3 on the same weekend. GP3 kind of stands out like a sore thumb. I don't think it has the popularity of Formula 2. I think quite a few people kind of just watch Formula 2 and kind of ignore GP3, which is fair enough, and possibly down to kind of the lack of overtaking, not quite the excitement levels of Formula 2. Like you said, maybe not the big names. If you look at the kind of entry list, maybe kind of the casual kind of fan who likes to watch a fair bit of single seaters might not recognise really any of those names, which I think is a bit of a shame. But I mean, what can you really do to rectify that? Well, possibly the solution is to combine with European Formula 3. If that would be on the same weekend as Formula 1 and Formula 2, that's a different matter. But I think for me that would make the most sense to combine it with Formula 3. Basically, you have 5 teams in Formula 3 at the moment and 6 teams in GP3. So surely if you kind of merge these two together, you'd have 11 teams. Then possibly one drops out, say it doesn't agree to the merger. You have 10 teams and they all run 3 cars, say, and you have a grid of 30 cars. Pretty healthy grid. And you have the likes of Lando Norris, Schumacher, Dennis, Aitken, Russell, and then suddenly you have quite a few standout names. Real kind of talent and depth, kind of strength in depth, which I'm not quite sure this grid has, to be honest, this year. When I was kind of saying which drivers will get to Formula 1, I kind of only said 2 names, which is not really how it should be, but I think that's probably the best solution going forward, but certainly a really, really difficult one, and there's so many different factors to consider that, factors we don't even know about, because of course we're not the people just trying to merge, and there's contracts and sponsors and money involved. And that's probably what's going to decide at the end, let's be honest, money and sponsors.
Yeah, I think that does seem like a good solution, but like you were saying, a lot easier said than done, really. And with although it could be a way to kind of get around the money side of Formula 1, with all the young talents just being snapped up so early now, obviously Lance Stroll and Max Verstappen being the standout two, would be a way of kind of boosting the name of GP3 really, to get a lot more young talents and bigger names in there. And obviously if these drivers are then able to progress onto F1, it would boost kind of the recognition the series would get as a whole. So moving on now to the final part of this preview, and that is going to be some predictions. So I'm going to ask you, who do you think will be your champion this year? Who do you think will be the best rookie? Obviously could be the same. And then one to watch for this season, who will be kind of a bit of a dark horse really, who could maybe stand out when we kind of less expect them to.
Right, I'm going to go with Jack Aitken, I think, for the driver's title. Pretty close, I think, with Russell. One to watch will be Boccolacci for sure, I think. He could be right up there, and I really hope he does. It would be fantastic to see another driver, a non-ART driver, really going at it for the title, which I think we will get. Aitken for the drivers, Boccolacci for more one to watch, and top rookie would be George Russell.
Yep, I actually had pretty much the exact same. Jack Aitken as the champion, kind of making the natural step up into the ART team, kind of trying to lead that team forward to a potential title this year. And again, rookie George Russell making that step straight into ART once again. You would naturally expect to see him winning races this season. And one to watch, I actually had Pulcini and Boccolacci, just generally due to their pace and the pedigree that they have had so far. So pretty much the same, apart from a little mention for Pulcini as well in the Arden car. And I think those two could be the two really. If there's going to be anyone who's going to challenge the ART guys, it could be those two, along with perhaps Ferrucci and some guys like that as well. So One final point I was going to make, as we haven't yet mentioned, I did say we were going to mention it, is the new DRS regulations. And so the regulation with this is that you get to use it for a total of 6 laps, I believe it is. And the idea is basically to promote, I guess, strategy and overtaking, really, and make the racing a little bit more exciting. So what are your thoughts on that, Josh?
Yeah, interesting. Well, like you said, 6 times in the feature race and 4 times in the sprint race, or over 6 laps in the feature race and 4 laps in the sprint race, because you can use it twice in the same lap and it only counts as 1 use. Interesting one, because it's going to be kind of trialled for Formula 1 as well, which is pretty cool. So it kind of feels kind of relevant as well, and it's not just where you can just open every single lap. So I think it's something I'd like to see in both Formula 2 and Formula 1 in the future. So overall, I think it's nothing really but a positive thing, and GP3 certainly, I think, needs it a lot more than Formula 2 did when it was introduced, I think, in 2015. Because GP3, didn't have a huge amount of overtaking. I think really since it's began, it's struggled to match Formula 2's level of overtaking. So I think hopefully this will, increase the amount of overtakes, and like you said, bring in a bit of a strategy and possibly a glimpse into Formula 1's future as well.
Yeah, I think it can only really be a good thing, as you were saying. Just generally improves the excitement of the racing, which can only be a good thing, and obviously something for the future of F1 to possibly think of. So that is going to round off this preview of the upcoming GP3 season. Hope you have enjoyed this preview. If you did, make sure to leave a like, comment your thoughts on the upcoming season as well, and subscribe for more racing content here on Motorcast. Our 2 Twitters will be in the description for a lot more motorsport related stuff on there if you want to, if you're interested in that sort of thing. And yeah, I'll see you next time, guys. Bye for now.